All right, today we are tackling one of the most popular, yet surprisingly controversial additions to absolutely any reef aquarium, the hermit crab. Look, anyone who has ever set up a saltwater tank knows that dealing with waste and leftover food, it's a constant battle, right? And building the perfect cleanup crew is essential. But here's the big debate that has split the reef community for years. Are hermit crabs the tireless, friendly janitors of the marine world, or are they secretly plotting to bulldoze your prized, expensive coral colonies?
So it begs the question, right? Are hermit crabs your tank's best friend or its worst enemy? It's kind of a classic Jekyll and Hyde scenario. On the one hand, you walk into almost any fish store and they're sold as an absolute non-negotiable necessity for a pristine ecosystem. But on the other hand, talk to enough hobbyists and you'll hear horror stories of them turning into these destructive little terrors. So today, we're going to unpack the dual nature of these fascinating scavengers. By the end of this explainer, you'll know exactly how to manage them so you can make the absolute best decisions for your own reef.
Okay, let's dive into this and look at the good stuff first. Their well-earned reputation as incredibly helpful scavengers.
When they're in their Dr. Jekyll state, hermit crabs are literally tireless. I mean, they spend all day just constantly foraging across your rockwork and your sandbed. And what are they looking for? Mostly detritus and uneaten food. This active foraging is a huge win for you because it directly supports the overall cleanliness of your tank. They're basically reducing localized waste accumulation. And this is especially crucial in those tricky dead spot areas of your tank where the water flow tends to just dump and trap fine particles that your main filtration system completely misses. They do the gritty, dirty work so you don't have to.
And this comparison perfectly illustrates that exact duality we're talking about. On the one side, we have the helpful scavenger. This is the dream crab we all want, right? Providing visible cleanup, cruising around in their shells, actively exploring the substrate, and recycling organics before they can rot and ruin your water quality. But then, plot twist, suddenly this helpful little janitor turns into a coral threat, nibbling on a stressed coral or aggressively digging up your carefully arranged sandbed. It's a pretty massive behavioral shift. It really makes you wonder, what exactly flips the switch?
Well, let's transition into that Hyde persona and figure out exactly how and why this coral damage actually happens.
What's really interesting about this slide is this idea of opportunistic feeding. Look, hermit crabs aren't usually malicious apex predators hunting down your expensive polyps for sport. Instead, they just consume whatever is readily available to them in the moment. The reality is, most reef keepers don't actually report constant aggressive predation. The real problem rears its head when the crabs are underfed or when their preferred food options dry up. In those moments of genuine desperation, yeah, they will absolutely opportunistically nibble at soft coral tissue. They especially love to target corals that are slow-growing or maybe already a little compromised. They're just trying to survive, but unfortunately, your delicate colonies end up paying the price.
But, it's not even just about what they decide to eat. We also have to talk about the collateral damage. Just their sheer physical presence can be incredibly disruptive. Hermit crabs can easily disturb the base of corals and other stationary organisms just by digging down into deep sand beds or clumsily displacing rubble as they bulldoze their way through your carefully planned aquascape. Plus, if they get into a turf war over shells, which we'll get into in just a second, that resulting aggression sends massive stress waves throughout the entire tank.
All right, so how do we fix it? Don't worry, you absolutely have control here. Let's look at the environmental variables that dictate their behavior. You are essentially the director of your tank's environment, and you have three key variables at your disposal. First up, species temperament. The specific species you buy heavily dictates their likely diet in captivity. But remember, even within the exact same species, individual temperaments can vary wildly, especially if your system is heavily stocked. Second, shell availability. Providing multiple, appropriately sized spare shells directly reduces stress-driven foraging. It's huge. And third, tank layout. Your aquascape, things like your substrate depth and how your rocks are stacked, actually controls coral contact. A super deep sandbed practically invites digging, while really tight, cramped rock zones physically force the crabs to constantly bump into your corals.
Let's zoom in on that second variable for a second, because the housing crisis is a real thing in reef tanks. Think of it exactly like a brutal real estate market. Hermit crabs grow, and when they grow, they literally have to find a bigger house. If there's a lack of spare shells laying around, competition just goes through the roof. And this intense competition triggers highly aggressive behavior and really unusual foraging as they desperately search for a new home. Sometimes, they'll even try to forcefully evict other shell-dependent snails right out of their homes. It stresses the whole system out and instantly turns your peaceful scavengers into neighborhood bullies.
Okay, let's pivot to some actionable advice. How do we keep these guys well-behaved and reef-friendly?
Before we get to the steps, I want you to burn this number into your memory. 0. There is a 0% guarantee that any hermit crab is completely 100% coral safe. Period. It's honestly kind of an illusion that the industry sometimes sells us. Because they are wild, opportunistic scavengers at heart, the potential for them to go rogue is literally always there. That absolute 0 just really drives home the need for vigilant prevention and management on your part. You can't just drop them in and forget about them.
So, the crucial point is, how do you manage their environment? Don't just cross your fingers and rely on random tank detritus to keep them full. Step 1, target balanced feeding. Feed them appropriately so they are satiated and happy. Step 2, once they've eaten, remove the obvious excess food so that organic buildup doesn't just sit there and become their only unhealthy dining option later. And step 3, monitor for persistent coral interest. Keep a close eye on them, especially right after you feed the tank, because that's when they're most active. You want to make absolutely sure they aren't turning their attention toward your soft coral tissues. To make this super easy, here is a quick best practices checklist. 1. Offer several spare shells of different sizes. Keep that real estate hunting pressure as low as possible. 2. Start with a small number of crabs. Don't go crazy and overstock your cleanup crew on day 1. Monitor a small group closely for the first few weeks. 3. Avoid adding hermits to a brand new tank or a tank where your corals are already stressed out and vulnerable. And finally, 4. If you do see targeted nipping or repeated aggression towards your corals, be fully prepared to relocate that specific crab. Sometimes, a swift eviction down to the sump is the only answer for a badly behaved hermit.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this incredibly authoritative quote from our source material today. The most reliable approach is prevention, species-appropriate expectations, ample shell options, careful feeding, and attentive monitoring. Hermit crabs absolutely can be incredibly helpful, highly entertaining cleaners in your reef ecosystem, but they demand the right context and the right care. So are they your tank's best friend or worst enemy? Well, the truth is, the answer depends entirely on the environment you choose to build for them. So as you look at your own stunning aquarium tonight, ask yourself, have you created a peaceful, plentiful habitat for a helpful scavenger, or a stressful, scarce battleground where their survival means snacking on your favorite coral? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Stay curious and happy reefing.